Hi, welcome back to episode 2 of Cultivating Peace, a mindfulness podcast that I'll be doing, talking about the mind, the way that it works, and some of the hang-ups that we face when we're dealing with our own brain. And I'm excited to share with you this discussion that we're talking about. It's going to be on perception. Perception is a really interesting thing because it impacts what we believe to be true. Everything that I believe about myself and about my community, everything I believe about the world that I live in and the work that I do is all filtered through my mind, through the experiences, the wealth of experience that I've had since being a little kid. You know, what is socially acceptable right now in my life, and how I act, how I behave, how I conduct myself, what I wear. It's all related to the experiences that have led me up to this point in my life. And I want to give you a little bit of an example. I listened to a Madonna song, and at that point, I didn't realize it was a Madonna song. I'm just listening to this song, and I'm jamming out, and I'm loving it, and I was just grooving to it. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the song, I find out, I look at my computer, and I find out that it was a Madonna song that just came on. And then my first thought was, oh no, not a Madonna song. I don't like Madonna. And then I thought about it and I realized what a strange comment that is. I just listened to a Madonna song. I just grooved to it. I just had a really good time listening to it as I'm dancing around my living room. And then I find out that it's a Madonna song and my first reaction is, oh, what a bummer, because I don't like Madonna. Completely distant from reality. It doesn't make any sense, but it's my perception. It's the experience that I've had leading up to this point in my life that really made me feel like I knew what kind of music I liked. Oh, I know what kind of music I like. I know which artists I do like, which artists I don't like. And I put Madonna in the category of artists that I just don't like, that I don't listen to. So then it holds me back from experiencing all the wealth of amazing music that Madonna has produced. And for no other reason than I made that decision when I was a kid growing up with my friends, that Madonna wasn't cool. Madonna wasn't something that I listened to. And so this really begs the question, was it ever my opinion that Madonna isn't a good artist? Or was that opinion formed on my group of friends, on the people that I spent time with? And was my opinion actually the opinion of other people that I assumed to be my own? See, the thing is, it doesn't matter too much when we're talking about music. But what about the relationships in my life? How does my perception change my relationships? How does my perception influence and impact my day-to-day experience as I live my life? You see, my character, my perception, the person that I am, the way that I dress, the way that I act, is all influenced by the wealth of experience that I've had since I was a kid. Everything that I've experienced has determined whether something is right or something is wrong. And so what I've created for myself is a dream on what is real, what is not real, on what is reality. Don Miguel Ruiz does a really beautiful job in The Voice of Knowledge articulating this dream and how our dream comes from this experience that we've had all the way up until the point that we are now in. And that sometimes our dream makes us believe things or do things or act in a way that actually holds us back from really enjoying the life that we live. So that our dream is not just a passive opinion based on life events, but it's actually determining why we are the way we are. The things that we say, the things that we do, the way that we behave in public versus the way that we behave at home, all dictated by what we've discovered is acceptable and allowable based on our dream. So what's incredible about this dream is that it has an influence on the way that we relate to ourselves. Are you aware of the fact that you have a relationship with yourself? You have a relationship with yourself in a very similar manner that you have a relationship with your parents, with your mom or your dad. You have a relationship with your friends in a different way that you have a relationship with your mom or your dad. You have a relationship with coworkers and different people in your life. Some people annoy you. Some people are good friends that you really confide in. Some people you really love and you care about and you do anything for, and other people you really kind of wish that they weren't necessarily in your life. You could almost do without them because they rub you the wrong way, or they're a little bit irritating. You will often find yourself having misunderstandings with this person. And it's similar to the relationship that you have to yourself. Sometimes you relate to yourself with love and compassion and kindness. Sometimes you relate to yourself with a real irritation. You're frustrated by yourself. You find yourself quite irritating. Sometimes you do things or say things and you're just frustrated by that person that you're being. This is a really common experience amongst all human beings. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about that a little bit. I'd like to talk about the fact that we relate to ourselves almost like we're relating to somebody else. We talk to ourselves, we're doing it all the time. And if you're not clear about the fact that you talk to yourself, and you're saying to yourself, what the hell is this Marcus guy talking about? I don't talk to myself. That's you talking to yourself. We're always judging and analyzing and perceiving the world around us through our mind. We're always judging, analyzing, and perceiving the world around us, and it influences the way that we see the world. We're perceiving it through our mind, letting it influence the way that we see the world, but everything that we're filtering through our mind is being filtered through the experience of everything that's happened to us up until this point. If you've had an experience with a certain gender that was very negative, you're going to relate to a lot of people from that gender in a very specific way. If you had an experience with a certain people group, a certain person, in a very specific or negative way, you're going to relate that experience to everything you perceive and observe moving forward. That's the way that our brain works. It categorizes and understands, perceives everything that comes in through the filter of our mind, and then makes sure that we don't fall into the same mistake twice. And now in having a relationship with yourself, it's important to understand that there's two parts to that relationship. Now the first part is that enlightened or the ideal version of yourself. It's that part of yourself that strives to be a good person, that strives to be more peaceful and kind. And it's the ideal version of how you imagine yourself to be. It's that part of yourself that you share with somebody on a first date. Your ideals and your views and your understandings of how the world should look. This is all encompassed by your ideal version of who you are. You strive to be a good person and bring more peace to the world. You strive to take care of others and be patient. Now, what you discover about this ideal version of yourself is that you fall short because you're human. And you fall short of this, let's call it the enlightened version or the ideal version of yourself. And what you're left with is the crummy version of yourself. I like to call it the human version of yourself. That part of yourself that gets impatient, that's unkind, that doesn't live up to the standard and the expectations that you would have for yourself. And that human version of yourself, that real gritty, ugly version of yourself, sometimes we try to hide that from other people. We separate that from ourselves and we try to almost pretend like that's not even who we are, because it's not who we want to be. So we've got the ideal self, we've got the human self, and they almost seem to be at odds with one another in conflict. Now that ideal self is an amazing standard to have and to try to live up to, but you gotta recognize and understand that it's the human experience to have that ideal version of yourself and to fall short of the standard or the bar that you set for yourself in life. And your practice from that is to accept and understand and appreciate that who you are is the ideal version of yourself, and it's that foibled mess that you make up every day. When you're impatient or when you're unkind, when you're not living up to your own standards, when the ideal version of yourself says, don't cut people off and treat other people with respect. It's that human version of yourself that's late for work and says, fuck it, I need to get there. It's the ideal version of yourself that wants to dress properly and be articulate with your verbiage and the way that you communicate. And then it's the human version of yourself that gets frozen up in an interview, that kind of clams up. And then you walk away from that situation thinking, what the heck? I know better than that. Why do I not live up to this ideal version of who I am? Now, what we do is we separate these two, and in between these two versions of ourselves is this big gap. And the further away we are from the enlightened or the ideal version of self, the more we are the human version of ourselves, the separateness causes shame, guilt, and doubt. Now, in that shame, guilt, and doubt, we're left with an understanding of ourselves like we're two different people. Like in public, I'm this ideal version of self, but when I close the door and I get home, I become this awareness of shame, and I'm not living the life that I proclaim to be living. I'm not living up to the standard that I've even set for myself. And what's interesting is that going even further than that, the ideal version of yourself is that standard that you set for everyone else around you. So that when somebody doesn't live up to your standards and social norms, they're not adequate. When somebody doesn't live up to your standards of how to dress, they're weird. When somebody doesn't live up to the bar that you've set for yourself in work, they're lazy. So we can see how when we create this ideal version of self, and we create this standard of living, we're naturally going to fall short. We're naturally gonna be a lesser version than our ideal self. And the impact of this is just negative thought patterns. So what do we do about it? What you discover when you realize that who you are is the ideal self and the human self. What you realize when these two halves make up who you are, you start to realize that these two halves make up every other human being in the world. And that everything that you observe and see about yourself and about everybody else is people's struggles with their ideal self and their human self. And that these two halves, separating them is only an illusion. That actually, in actuality, these two halves are fully you. That what makes you you is that ideal self, that striving to be a good person, that passion to make the world a better place. And it's that part of you that falls short of your own standards and expectations, and the person that you really, really want to be in the world. That is you. Bring these two halves together. It's authenticity. Authenticity will allow you to communicate in a really different way because it allows you to share with people who you're striving to be and where you fall short of that. It allows people to see you as complete so that now when you go and you meet somebody for the first time, you don't just share with them the ideal version of yourself, but you use your wisdom and your understanding to share with them where you're growing, where you're working, where you're understanding yourself to fall short, and how those shortcomings can motivate you to be more and more like that ideal version of yourself. That you have the capacity to identify your shortcomings and where you don't live up to your ideal version of self, and how you can make changes and grow in different capacities to bring these two halves together. Let your ideal self and your human self coexist peacefully together, and you will be free from the shame that exists when we separate these two parts. What's really awesome about this is that the relationship that you have with the ideal self and the human self, it relates to how you deal with yourself, but it also relates to your relationships with other human beings. Let me explain. When you first meet somebody, they'll typically show you their ideal version of self. They'll typically show you, the good traits that they have and what they're creating with their life, who they strive to be, and what they want to do with their lives. This ideal version of themselves is what we typically sell ourselves to be. And so when you first meet them, you get this viewpoint from from this perspective. You see their ideal self. And as you get to know them, you spend some time together, and you still see that ideal version of self, but then you get a little glimpse of the human version as well. And then as time goes on, you spend a little bit more time with them. Maybe you build a relationship with this person, and then something shitty happens, and you really see that human version. Forgive my eyeballs. You really get to see that version as both their human self and their ideal self. You recognize that they strive to be a good person. You recognize that they desire to make the world a better place, but that they fall short. And you recognize that about them, and you see that in yourself, and it makes sense to you. You see that they are both their ideal self and their human self. Now, what happens when somebody really gets you worked up? Right in the midst of a fight, and they're really raging with you, and you're worked up with them. You typically see them from this perspective. You see their human self. You see their human self, and it completely blocks you off from their ideal self in the midst of that situation. You see the shittiness of that situation. You see the shittiness of them and their arrogance and their pride and everything else. You see that human self, and what's hiding behind that human self is their ideal version of self, that person that they strive to be. But you ignore that. You ignore that in the midst of that situation because all you want to see at that point is the shittiness of that human. And we do this with ourselves all the time too. It's the battle between the human self and the ideal self. It's a constant struggle, and if we don't accept both halves of these parts, if we don't accept the human self along with the ideal self as one and complete, then you'll never get to fully accept who you are. When you bring these two halves together and accept that who you are is the ideal version of what you strive to be and how you strive to act and behave, and that part of you that falls short of your expectations, if you don't accept these two parts of yourself and bring them together, then you'll never feel authentic, complete, and whole. You can't have the experience of feeling separate in these areas. You can't separate these two and feel complete in who you are as a human being. In the same way that you can't be in relationship with somebody else and accept them only as their human self or only as their ideal self. You need to allow that relationship to grow from both recognizing their human self and accepting that part of who they are and their ideal self. It's in accepting both of these parts in a relationship that the relationship can grow and understanding can flourish. In the same way, you need to accept both parts of these cells. You need to accept both parts of who you are in order to find appreciation, respect, and acknowledgement for who you are as a human being. So the really cool thing about this relationship thing, you're going to relate that experience to every fear, every moving, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little.